Hello Year 11, and we are going to start off today's lesson by having a little bit of a think about the lady you can see on the screen in front of you. And I wonder if you recognise her and know who she is. She is before your time, really, I suppose, but to somebody of my age, she is completely and instantly recognisable. She is Margaret Thatcher. She was leader of the Conservative Party from the mid-70s, and she was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1979 to 1990, so all through the 1980s. To some people, she is a hero who completely changed the politics and the economics of the UK and sort of pulled it into the 20th century. To other people, she is a villain who ripped the heart out of the United Kingdom, and some people have never forgiven her for the changes she brought to the UK. Because love her or hate her, and if you talk to your grandparents, I'm sure they'd have an opinion on her, she changed the UK in multiple ways. She changed the work that was being done in the UK, and she completely changed our economy. Now, there is no doubt that many people who sort of live in Yorkshire would agree with this mug, that they still hate Thatcher. And if you take time to watch the two videos that are sort of linked up here that I'll put in the description on the form, you might begin to gain some ideas of why. And it all links to what we are looking at in today's lesson, and that is thinking about how the UK economy has changed, okay? And we are particularly looking at the idea of the heavy industries in the UK. So the industries that we made a lot of money out of in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, so steelworks, coal mines, things like that. We are going to be looking at how those industries declined, and we ended up not having those kinds of industries, and how it changed to the kind of industries that we have today with the services industries and the banking and the shops. So we are looking at this idea of deindustrialization. And these images here show you what deindustrialization is. It's the process where those industries that were set up in the Industrial Revolution, that were, steel and coal, shipbuilding, heavy industries that employed huge amounts of people, mostly men in those big heavy industries, but certainly some women had jobs, sort of particularly maybe in office spaces or canteens, that sort of thing. People had far more traditional job roles back in the sort of 50s, 60s, 70s. So deindustrialization is about the decline and eventual deaths of those industries, and it was a really painful time. So in the 1980s, as you can sort of see from this picture here, there was a lot of striking. There were a lot of very, very unhappy people, and of course when you go on strike you don't make any wages, and the people that were striking were not able to claim benefits. So for the people, especially in the coal mines, who went out on strikes, and if you've watched the movie Billy Elliot, you might have a bit of an indication of what it was like for people in those times. And if you go and visit towns that used to be mining areas, so I'm from an old mining area, we used to have the working men's club and the miners clubs, and those clubs were a real support to people during the times of strike because people had so little money. So if you haven't seen Billy Elliot, I do recommend watching it. It gives you a really good idea of what it was like for people during deindustrialization if you worked in these heavy industries that were closing down. And it's just a really cool movie as well. So if you've not seen it, do take some time and watch it. It will really give you a good indication of what we mean by deindustrialization and the impacts it had on people. And you might also be able to understand why some people still have that incredible anger about the process of deindustrialization and the Conservative government, and particularly Margaret Thatcher, who brought it into place. Okay, so these pie charts show us how the UK economy has changed over time, and it's really common in the exam to get something like this and to have to describe it. So we can see if we look at 1800, we have got a huge amount of primary industry, a little bit of secondary and a little bit of tertiary, okay? And if you can't quite remember what those mean, have a look at this below here. Okay, so primary is you're working with the land, so mining, fishing, farming. Secondary is factories. So you're taking the raw materials and you are making them into something in a factory. So a car factory, a table factory, whatever. Tertiary is providing a service. So teachers, doctors, nurses, shop assistants, dentists, okay, they are all providing you with a service. And quaternary is something that's a lot more recent. Hey, when I did geography as a kid, we didn't talk about quaternary, it didn't really exist. So that's the use of information technology, so web design or weapon modelling or disease modelling, something like that, okay? So if we go back to the pie charts, we can see that by 1900, we've had a massive change, okay? We have got far less primary. So we've gone from 75% to 30%. And basically the reason for that is mechanisation. Between 1800 and 1900, lots of machinery was invented that you could use in the fields. So when you were ploughing your field or getting the harvest in, you didn't need loads of workers with a scythe, you had your combine harvester. Okay, so that's one of the big reasons for that change. We have this huge growth of the industrial sector because of the Industrial Revolution, using coal to make steam power, building all those factories. And then we can see a bit of an increase in services as people's wealth was beginning to grow. They could begin to afford those services. More people were attending school. People were more aware of healthcare, that sort of thing. By 2006, we have got absolutely massive changes again. That secondary, okay, so the industry has gone, yeah, it's only 15% now, and lots of those factories have moved overseas where they have got a bigger workforce and a cheaper workforce, so moving off over to Asian countries. We have got hardly any primary at all, again because of that increased use of mechanisation. We have got massive growth of the services industry as the things that we want and we expect change. Okay, all kids go to school. We have got good healthcare. We have got a banking system that everybody's got access to. We've got film, we've got media, and all those people are employed in services, so tertiary and then quaternary for more modern services using that information technology. Okay, so do spend some time looking at these and just thinking about how they've changed and why they have changed, because it is quite common in the exam to maybe be asked to explain why these changes have happened, say maybe for a 4-mark question. So we are going to focus on this change here, this change from having 55% secondary to only 15%, and then also we're going to be looking at a later period at the growth of the services here. So to illustrate this, we're going to look at the coal mining industry. So you can see here, 1983, 170 working coal mines. By 2009, there are only 4. And the last mine closing in 2016. And as I said earlier in the lesson, this was a really painful time period for the UK where lots and lots of people were losing their jobs, and the consequences of it are still felt today. If we look at deprivation across the UK, and we specifically look at deprivation in areas where there were coal mines. So when we talk about deprivation, if you remember, we're talking about when an area is poor and people don't have the things they need in order to live a decent life. So they don't have those services. So maybe they've got poor and overcrowded housing. Maybe they can't afford to buy decent food. Maybe there's a lack of opportunity for employment, so there's not many employers in the area. Maybe the public transport is poor, that sort of thing. Now, if we look at this map of Doncaster here, all these red circles show you where there used to be coal mines, okay? And then this area here is this area here. And particularly if we look at this area here, out towards the west here, around sort of Mexborough, Barnborough, Goldthorpe, and then we look at deprivation levels. So this dark red shows the deprivation, shows the areas that are poorest. So we can see where in the past we had a large concentration of coal mines. That is where today we have heavy levels of deprivation, because those traditional industries were taken out of those areas. And we've talked before about, like, if you can remember when we did London Docklands, we talked about how people that had worked in the docks at London Docklands, just because there was a redevelopment programme where loads of banks and shops and services were then built in Docklands, doesn't mean that the old dock workers could do those jobs. So we see the same with the coal mines. When the coal mines closed down, all those blokes who'd spent years working down the coal mines, and their dad had worked down the coal mine and their granddad had worked down the coal mine, those people didn't have any of the skills or the education or the equipment to then be able to go and get a job in a bank or in a shop or in a cafe. It's not going to happen for them. So where you had those generations of people working in the coal mines, when the coal mines closed, there was nothing there for them. So here we have a really clear example of the link between deindustrialization and deprivation. Okay, so the coal mines closed, the factories closed, and as a result there were no jobs for the people that had worked down those coal mines or in those factories. And it doesn't matter if you bring in new services, those people that worked in those industries can't access them. So let's have a little look at this kind of question you might answer. So describe and explain 2 impacts on deindustrialisation in the north of the UK. And basically you're going to need to make 2 points and just explain them. So what kind of people were affected? How were they affected, and what impact did it then have on their quality of life? What did it mean for their housing or the food that they were able to buy or the amount of disposable income that they had access to? Okay, so that leads us on to thinking, well, why did this happen? If it had such a huge impact on people in the north and the coal mines and it made their lives so terrible, why did it happen? Well, there's a variety of different reasons. First of all, we've got mechanisation, okay? Machines don't want holidays, they don't want sick pay, they don't want to have the weekend off, they don't want to clock off at 5 o'clock. Machines can just keep trucking. So mechanisation often takes away those more manual jobs, okay? We have other countries like China, Malaysia, Indonesia able to produce cheaper goods because the labour there is less expensive, the people don't need paying as much. Throughout the 70s, there was a lack of investment in the UK, meaning that we had very high labour costs and outdated machinery, so UK products became very expensive. Coal that was left was quite deep and it was getting more and more expensive to mine with the outdated machinery that we had. And finally, globalisation, okay, this idea that countries are more linked together, and that is what allowed this massive explosion of services, so the tertiary and the quaternary industry in the UK. We're good at banking, we're good at finance, and with things like the internet and high-speed phone cables and satellites, we're able to sell our services, we're able to sell our banking expertise, or we're able to sell our media, we're able to sell movies and music. So that interconnectivity of different countries completely changed the way that wealthy countries with people with good educations like we've got in the UK were able to make money. So if we're going to explain 2 causes of deindustrialisation in the UK, we could take any of these ideas here and we would say what it was, and then we would say the impact it has. So for example, we could write something like, 1 cause of deindustrialisation is mechanisation. This is because one machine can do the work of many people and it can do it for a longer time and it can do it more quickly. A really good example of that would be a car production line, okay, where instead of people putting the machinery into the car, you've got a robot doing it, okay, and that robot can do it very quickly and very precisely. So if you were to get a really unpleasant question on the exam paper, it might ask you how It might ask you how deindustrialisation was influenced by government policies. And what it means by government policies is the decisions that the government was taking at the time over how the country was being run, okay? because a lot of the deindustrialisation did happen because of what Margaret Thatcher decided to do with her government. Okay, that's why people have so much anger towards her in these sort of coal mining and steel working areas. Because what happened was, in the 1970s, there was a Labour government, and rather than things like the coal mines and the steelworks being owned by private companies, they were owned by the state. So there was the National Coal Board, there was British Steel, and the government spent money kind of holding these industries up. So there was no need for those industries to be competitive. There was no need to invest in new machinery and spend that money, because money was coming from the government in order that those industries could stay open. And that resulted in them being very unprofitable. And so in the 1970s, when the government, the Labour government of the time, tried to remove some of that support and tried to get those businesses to invest in themselves and become more profitable, there were lots of strikes, there was lots of social unrest, there were factory closures, and there were power cuts. Okay, so some evenings there was no electricity in people's homes. So, you know, it was a difficult time in the late 1970s. And then, you know, enter Margaret Thatcher, the Conservative government, in 1979, and she sort of looked at that and thought, right, you know, we're not having it. We are getting rid of this state ownership, and these companies are either going to make a profit or they are going to collapse and die. So the government, the Tory government and Margaret Thatcher's, they took that support away, okay, and they sold off all these businesses to private companies. And then as the industries closed down because they weren't profitable, many jobs were lost, and those industrial areas became derelict and were transformed into financial centres and retail outlets and offices, okay? Which for those coal miners and those steel workers, that was no good. So where the sort of dislike and hatred for Margaret Thatcher comes from is that had the Tory government decided to, they could have continued propping those industries up. Those industries could have stayed open. But the Tory government made the decision that in the long run, those industries couldn't be profitable and they just had to get rid of them. Okay? Today, we have got what was known as a rebalancing of the economy, where it has been recognised that we do need to try to bring some of these industries back. And there has been a lot of investment in things like the car industry, the aerospace industry, lots of apprenticeships, lots of engineering. Okay, so things like London Crossrail, HS2 being built, the government convincing companies like Nissan to invest in and locate with the UK. So we've had this change in policy, okay, from state ownership in the 70s to privatisation and deindustrialisation as the industries closed down, okay, to then the rebalance of the economy and trying to rebuild some UK manufacturing with things like aerospace. Okay, so do be aware that there has been this change over time as our economy has changed. Now, to try to make this a little more palatable for you, I have written a sample answer of the kind of thing that you might write to answer a question like this, because it is hard. So do take some time to just have a read through this answer. Maybe, you know, write it out a couple of times on a piece of scrap paper and try to get it into your head how these government policies have changed and how that's led to the UK economy changing. Okay? So hopefully that all makes sense. Sorry this is a bit of a long video. There was an awfully large amount to get through. So thank you for your attention. Have a go at the questions on the assignment. And if you do get time, have a look at those little couple videos that I've linked for you. They show the strikes at the Orgreave coal mine in Sheffield, and also a sort of like Thatcher's Dead party in the Doncaster area in Goldthorpe. So just have a little look at them. Any questions with this, because I know it's complicated, please email me or ask me when you're back in school. Okay, thanks Year 11. Bye.